Hi, welcome to Light Camera Author. This is episode 293, and I'm Jim Juno, the host, and I have with me today Chris McKittrick. He has a new book coming out. It's entitled Vera Miles, the Hitchcock Blonde Who Got Away. Chris, welcome to Light Camera Author.
Thank you very much for having me, Jim. Happy to be here.
Vera Miles. Now she was very big. A lot of people may know her from television more than movies. But she was in some very big movies, especially with, as the title implies, with Alfred Hitchcock. Most notably, I'll go on the record to say this is probably her most famous role was in Psycho. She played the sister of Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh. And I'm not giving away any spoilers if you haven't seen the movie, but there near the end she finds the mother. And Chris, I mean, she was the scream queen of the movie, wasn't she?
Absolutely. I mean, in some ways, she's kind of the original Scream Queen in a lot of ways because the scream that she does, and there's audio mixing afterwards, but the scream that she does is just unforgettable.
Exactly. And if you've never seen the movie, you should see it. And if you have seen the movie, you know exactly the scene I'm talking about. When I was a kid and I was watching it, it scared the life out of me. Okay, and it's near the end of the movie, so I don't want to give away too much. But she finds mother. I'll just say that much. Now, Chris, what drew you to Vera Miles?
Well, what really interested me as an of her as an actress is, first of all, no one ever has done a book about her, which is always interesting. But she not only made movies with Alfred Hitchcock, and those are probably, as you said, Psycho is probably her most famous film. But she also worked with John Ford in and Walt Disney, and not just the Walt Disney Company, Walt Disney himself, who actually on more than one occasion referred to her as his favorite actress. She did movies, of course, with John Wayne. She did movies with Bob Hope. And what interested me about that is here's an actress who we don't tend to hear a lot about, but yet she worked with all these monumental figures in the mid 20th century film industry, Hollywood. And on top of that, she often worked with them multiple times. You know, John Ford put her in two movies and did a television special with her, and also wanted to do more movies with her, but the schedules never lined up. Alfred Hitchcock, of course, had her signed to a exclusive contract. So not only was she working with these famous figures, but they also saw enough in her that they wanted to keep working with her. And I found that very appealing. And I personally wanted to know more about her. And that kind of led to writing a book about her.
The movies that she turned down are almost as famous as the movies she appeared in. I mean, Hitchcock wanted her in Vertigo, but she was pregnant with her third child. So he cast Kim Novak, um, whom I'm not sure was the best choice, but who knows. Um, so did he have you've heard the stories about how he had a hold on actresses. Did he have a hold on Vera Miles?
He had a hold in her hold on her in terms of having her under an exclusive contract. Um, One of the things I wanted to focus on in my book is because Vera Miles does not who's still with us, thankfully. Um, she has not spoken to the press in many years. That she doesn't hasn't detailed a lot about her relationship with Hitchcock. So that has led to a lot of speculation, especially when other actresses like Tippi Hedren has come out about, sort of the difficult working relationship she had with Hitchcock. And
Difficult. You mean torturous?
yes, I'm trying to be diplomatic here, but yes, Jim, yes. Um, so especially when the famed biographer Donald Spoto put out his Hitchcock book in 1983, The Dark Side of Genius. He sort of speculated a lot about the Miles and Hitchcock relationship. He speculated about how um, um, there was implications that, maybe there was something going on between the two of them behind closed
Mm.
doors. And she was very angry about that. She came out and publicly said, Hitchcock and I had the most professional relationship. Um, yes, there were times that it was difficult for us to work together because he had an idea of where he wanted my career to go, and I had a different idea about that. Um, but if he and I'm paraphrasing the quote, but it was something along the lines of, if he ever tried any of that casting couch with stuff with me, I would have told him to go to hell. And
Yeah.
which kind of gives an idea of what type of an actress she was. She was very headstrong and very guiding of her own career, even when she was under contract with Hitchcock. So that really intrigued me because of, like you said, all this story, the stories surrounding Hitchcock's relationship with his lead actresses. Vera Miles kind of had a little bit of both that myth and that and that reality that I really wanted to look at in the book.
He and like you mentioned, like we mentioned earlier, she was pregnant with her third child, and he wanted her in Vertigo. And it almost sounded to me like she had to make a choice between being a mother for a third time or do the movie. I'm not sure if Hitchcock pressured her or anything like that. We don't. You don't know anything about that, do you?
Well, the problem with Vertigo is Vertigo had a long pre-production history to get to the point where they shot the film. They at one point they were ready to roll on the film, and then James Stewart's wife, demanded that he take a vacation because he had done 3 or 4 movies right in a
Mm.
row. She felt he was exhausted, or maybe Jimmy Stewart wanted to take a vacation and use his wife as an excuse. Who knows? Um, but in reality, the script wasn't ready yet anyway. So Hitchcock wasn't. Let me rephrase that. Hitchcock wasn't satisfied with the script yet. So they postponed the film. Then Hitchcock was hospitalized twice because he
Mm.
was developing some health issues, including gallstones and things like that. Um, so while he was hospitalized, this delayed the film for several months. And that was when he was finally ready to kind of get the project going. And Miles called up one of close collaborator, Herbert Coleman, and said, I gotta talk to Hitch. I gotta tell him something. I'm pregnant. And in some ways, Hitchcock never really forgave her for that because he had built her
Mhm.
up in in his movie The Wrong Man. He had her in the very first episode of his TV show, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and really wanted to make her his new it girl, the way that he couldn't do with Grace Kelly anymore because she ran off and became a princess,
Mhm.
um, and he did say some comments that definitely today would be very much frowned upon. He
Yes,
told Miss
that's right.
Miles, "Don't you know it's bad taste to have more than 2 children?" Um, you know, um,
Mm.
and things along that nature. And he was very upset about it. And the fact that Vertigo itself, although today we look at it as a masterpiece, didn't light the box office on fire, I'm sure
No.
also hurt his feelings about that. He was never thrilled with Kim Novak's performance. I think he used the term, or he did use the term, he called her, she was adequate in the role,
Mhm.
which I was probably a very British way of him
Mhm.
saying she did fine, but not what I wanted. And,
He was
he was,
also unhappy with Jimmy Stewart's performance too. He
yes,
blamed
yes, they
him.
never, even though they discussed working on another film after that, they never worked together again. And Jimmy Stewart was one of his favorite actors for a long time. Um, so yeah, there was a lot of bad feelings coming out of Vertigo. Nowadays, we call it a masterpiece, but at the time, Hitchcock certainly didn't feel that way. And the fact that Vera Miles kind of pulled out with good reason at when he was finally ready to shoot, it was just unfortunate for the situation. But in her defense, she never regretted it. She goes, Kim Novak got the movie, but I got a son. So
Exactly. Yeah. So now, you mentioned also with John Ford, The Searchers, which is one of the all-time great westerns of all time. She was in that one. And she liked working with John Ford, didn't she?
Yes, John Ford was someone that she wanted to work with even more. And again, scheduling wise, because you mentioned her as a television actress, she did so much TV work that oftentimes, uh, and part of the reason why she did TV work was because she could spend more time with her family,
Hmm.
because it was always local to Hollywood. A lot of times shooting a TV show, she could do it in a couple days or a week at most. Whereas a movie like The Searchers, she would have to be on set for weeks. And out Monument Valley, this is 1955. You can't pick up a phone and call your children or FaceTime or anything like that. Um, so yes, she was in The Searchers, and that was really her breakout movie role for her. And wonderfully, I got to speak with Patrick Wayne, John Wayne's son, who was in
Oh
the
yeah.
movie and worked with her on set in that. And he obviously very complimentary of his time with Miles. I mean, he was just a teenager when he worked on the film, but I believe him and Vera Miles are the last two living cast members from The Searchers.
You mentioned briefly her TV work, and she appeared. I'll be honest, she appeared on more TV shows than anybody I have ever seen. The only two I can think of that she didn't appear on was probably Star Trek and Batman, you know. and But she got her star on Hollywood Boulevard not because of her movie work, but because of her television work. She didn't want to be a regular on a series, though, did she? Didn't she say that was going to be the worst thing that could ever happen to an actress?
Yeah, as you said, what's amazing about her career, she was in so many TV shows that are people recall, really fan favorite TV shows. Probably most famous, she was in one of the best Twilight Zone episodes. She was on Canon. She was on, My Three Sons. She was on The Fugitive. She was in the pilot episode of The Fugitive. And we'll get back to the pilots. She was
Mhm.
going all the way to Magnum PI and Murder She Wrote. She was in
Murder
three
She
episodes.
Wrote. I mean,
Columbo.
yeah,
She kept being in all these really famous Ironside. All these big TV shows of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. She was in. And you said Batman. I also think she also the only other one I could think of is she wasn't on Gilligan's Island. That's another one
that's
she missed.
right.
But even like Hollywood Squares, she was on Hollywood Squares and things like that. She was in a lot of pilot episodes, and she liked that because a lot of times in those days, pilot episodes were like a TV movie to launch, like Canon, the first one of the first the pilot episode of Canon was a TV movie. So she liked that, but she didn't want to be a regular on a series because she wanted to keep that flexibility. She was in she was in one pilot where she committed to the series, which was this 1971 Jeff Bridges, back when before Jeff Bridges was a movie star, when he's
Mm.
still a young guy. It was called In Search of America, and she played his mother, and she committed that to be a series, but it never got picked up. So after all that, she finally decided to commit to a pilot, and it didn't become
And
a
didn't
series
tell.
after all that.
And that was one of them I don't remember. Now, give me the Twilight Zone episode by title only, and I'll tell you what it was.
Oh, Mirror Image.
Mirror Image. Oh gosh, that's one of the lesser known ones. Let's see. That was where she was the guy woke up and was married to a different, or the woman he was married to didn't remember him. Is that it?
No, it's the one
Uh,
where she's in a bus station,
oh,
and
that's right, with
yeah,
Martin Milner.
yes, yes.
Okay.
She's in the bus station, and all of a sudden she goes up to ask, it's a quiet middle of the night bus station. She goes up to ask the ticket taker, when's my bus coming? And he goes, you just asked that question 10 minutes ago. You got to stop asking. She goes, what are you talking about? This is the first time I did it tonight. And the episode's all about, seeing your doppelganger and things like that. It's kind of a
Yes.
freaky episode. And there's a lot of camera tricks to kind of do two of her on the screen at the same time. So really, really one of the really, really impressive ones. And speaking of the
It is.
television, she of course made her big splash with Hitchcock in the very first episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, called Revenge. And that was really what impressed Hitchcock enough to have her under an exclusive contract.
And even though she turned down, or even though she couldn't be in Vertigo, he still used her in his television show, didn't he? I think she was on three times.
Yes. So not yes, she was still even though he was a little burned about the Vertigo situation,
Hmm.
he still had her on a television show, even though they weren't episodes that Hitchcock himself directed. And of course, he then also used her in Psycho because he still had her under that exclusive contract, even though he was losing he more or less lost interest in her
Yes.
as boosting her career.
And that's a shame too, because she could have. I kept thinking she could have been really big if I guess she didn't mind not having a big career. I mean, remember in your episode that's good in your chapter in the beginning where it's like they asked her if she did not fulfill her potential,
Right,
and she responded a little bit testily, didn't she?
right. Yeah, she said something along the lines of, "Who the hell judges potential anyway? I
Hmm.
raised my family, I had a career, that's what was important to me." And that goes in line with how many actors at that time would have loved to have been a regular on a TV series, and yet she didn't. That she was the opposite. I don't want to be a regular on a TV series. I want to just pop in, do my episode, do Hawaii Five-0, and then the next day do something else.
She got a free trip to Hawaii out of the Hawaii 50 trip. I mean, hey,
Can't blame her.
it's and she liked doing TV. Excuse me. The tell me a little bit about she was on every television like I said earlier, every television show it seemed, including something called no, Craft Suspense Theater, Craft Mystery Theater. What, I remember seeing this once on MeTV a long time ago. It was Suspense Theater, I think it was called, or something like that, where it was an anthology series.
Yes, and she did a lot of those anthology series early in her career. In fact, she credited that as helping her learn how to act. Because
Hmm.
one thing we didn't touch upon yet is that she came to Hollywood as because she was Miss Kansas in the 1948 Miss America pageant. And she had not had any acting experience before that. Back then, Hollywood regularly sent scouts to Atlantic City for that contest because they figured, you know, um, these women may not know how to act, but they sure are knockouts. So we could teach them how to act, and there's a fair amount of actresses that came out of the Miss America tour, I said tournament pageant. they
That's
don't
okay.
they don't box, probably most notably Cloris Leachman, who
Hmm.
but Vera Miles was one of them, and she got offered several contracts, ended up signing one with Howard Hughes, who put her under contract. He came out and she came out to Hollywood, didn't do much for him. Then he ended up dropping her. She signed with 20th Century Fox. They didn't do much with her. She signed with Warner Brothers. They put her in a movie or two. So while she was kind of waiting around, not being in movies, she said, I got to work." So she did modeling and she did television. And while on television, she did a lot of these anthology series. Um, some of them were live to tape or broadcast live, so that really taught her how to act, because she really didn't know. I mean, Howard Hughes supposedly gave her acting lessons, but I think he had other ideas about most of the starlets he had.
I was gonna say, yeah,
Yeah, I don't.
yeah.
He didn't have them there for acting. So yeah, absolutely.
No,
She did a lot of these programs early in her career. Um, and then later on, when television started to have more and more series, that's when she would do the guest appearances.
and television was taking off right at that moment too, because and she said that's how she learned how to act when she was doing television roles.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. And that opened doors for her. In fact, both John Ford and Alfred Hitchcock first discovered her from watching her on television. John Ford, his wife saw her on TV and said, "Hey, come take a look at this actress." And then Alfred Hitchcock had seen her in a program where she portrayed a woman with breast cancer. And he was really
Mm.
taken by her dramatic performance, and reached out to her, and then eventually she ended up on his first episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which wasn't meant to be the first episode, but he really enjoyed her performance so well that he made it the first episode.
And he cast her in the early, I mean, earlier than Psycho. It was The Wrong Man. She was in that. And that was really supposed to be her big break, wasn't
Yes, and
it?
that was a different movie for Hitchcock because number one, it was based on true events. Uh, and given a little background for those who may not be familiar with the movie, Henry Fonda plays a New York City jazz musician who was, as the title implies, wrongfully accused of robbing a loan office. And from I'm not giving anything away from the movie because you
No,
know from the way the movie's presented that he is not the man who did it. However, uh, sort of following the real life facts of the case, the guy couldn't catch a break. Everything about him fit the profile perfectly. The timing, his alibi didn't fit because he said he was at this hotel. He was at this hotel getaway when the robbery happened, and I think the proprietor of the hotel died between the time of the investigation and that. So that alibi was blown out of water. Um, and so in the movie, Vera Miles plays his wife Rose, and she suffers a nervous breakdown during the character. In fact, and so did the real life Rose, because he had gone to the loan office where he got wrongfully identified because he was getting money for something for her. And so she had this tremendous guilt. And Miles is more famous for Psycho, but I think this is her better of the two performances that she did for Hitchcock because she, you know, portraying something like a mental breakdown was kind of not always the most delicate handled in Hollywood in that time
exactly.
frame.
No.
Yeah, and I think she does an extraordinary job considering those circumstances. And I really could see why um, Hitchcock saw that in her. I do think there was a problem though, because he wanted her to be his new Grace Kelly. Now, in the movies Grace Kelly did with Hitchcock, she was always this high class society, you know, uh, you know,
Mhm.
just framed and shot so beautifully. Where in The Wrong Man, Vera Miles was playing a working class man's wife. Her wardrobe reflected that. She didn't have the long white gloves
Right.
like Grace Kelly, and so I think maybe that would have was probably the wrong movie, no pun intended, to try to launch her. But I still think it's a wonderful performance.
Let me ask you, we talked a little bit about this before the interview, but she's still with us.
Yes.
Um, but she did not, I mean, you reached out to her, but she didn't reciprocate.
Yeah, she's known to still correspond with fans. I actually have know people who've gotten some beautiful autographs from her, just
Hmm.
writing to her. And I did reach out. I sent her what I thought was a very nice letter. But Vera Miles, so she did one last movie in 1995, which is basically a glorified cameo. And she then retired and, really has turned down all opportunities to do interviews or I'm sure she's gotten tons of invitations to talk about Hitchcock, talk about John Ford, but she did a lot of those interviews towards the end of her career, and I feel like she probably said all she needed to say, or felt that she needed to say. However, from my perspective, and while she's totally entitled to her privacy, I do think in some ways that has hurt her perception. I've read books about Hitchcock's work that almost completely ignore her, even though she was in two of his movies. She was in two of his television programs that he directed.
Mhm.
I mean, he worked with her more than most of the actresses that are known as Hitchcock blondes. And yet she's
Yeah.
the one that's talked about, I feel, the least, simply because she doesn't talk about herself all that often. So one of my real goals with writing this book is I would love more people to discover her as an actress and see the extraordinary work that she did and why all these major filmmakers were so taken with her as a performer.
Did Hitchcock ever talk about her?
He did, yes. Well, first of all, as he was promoting her, he talked about how
Right.
wonderful she was,
Hmm.
talked her up. Um, but he ultimately the comments after they stopped working together. Um, really kind of focused on she was supposed to be in Vertigo and she gave up the chance of a lifetime to have another baby,
Mm.
which certainly is very much in the Hitchcock temperament. But not, it's one of those things you could not imagine a filmmaker saying today and getting away with it. I think all of social media would be all after him if he said that. But
Oh, I can imagine.
yeah,
Yeah.
but she spoke mostly fondly about her work with him. Um, you know, her biggest criticism was that sometimes he was difficult to work with because he had one idea of the way my career should go,
Hmm.
and I had a different idea. Because while she was under that exclusive contract, she could do all the TV she wanted. It was only an exclusive film contract, but he had final say on what film projects she could do. So I'm sure that you know, was challenging, or I know that was challenging because there was projects that studios wanted her for, but Hitchcock said, nope, that's not part of my plan, for her. But generally she has talked very highly about her work with him, even if there, wasn't a perfect fit. Maybe the exclusive
Yeah.
contract wasn't the best idea.
Then she did he okay the Tarzan movies that she was in?
So she was in that Tarzan movie before she even the Tarzan movie she was in where she met her second husband, Gordon Scott.
Right.
She was in that movie before she started working with Hitchcock. Um, and what's interesting about that movie, first of all, that's as I mentioned, she met her second husband, Gordon Scott. Um, but Yeah, so Gordon Scott he had become the new Tarzan in Hollywood, and this very interesting thing about Vera Miles is that she was married several times, and every husband she was married to was also involved in the industry, but none of them quite had as big of a career as she did, which is really interesting if you think about it, because that wasn't common at the time. If there was a actor and an actress that were married, normally it was the actor that was the bigger star,
Yeah.
or they were both really big stars. You didn't really see that dynamic too often. So Gordon Scott, of course, was Tarzan, but back in that day, if you were, it's not like if you play Batman or Superman today where you do other movies, James Bond, you do other movies. If you were Tarzan at that time, you were
You
Tarzan.
did Tarzan.
And yeah, Gordon Scott did about five Tarzan movies. And then eventually, in order to do other roles, he quit Tarzan, moved to Europe, and started doing spaghetti westerns and those like sword and sandal movies. I did at least one with Steve Reeves. All those kind of movies, which was still based on his physique.
Yeah.
Really, because he was just this, I mean, unbelievable human specimen. But yeah, so that's a little about Gordon Scott, who was her second husband. But yes, Hitchcock, I'm sure would not have approved of more Tarzan movies with her.
Well, I tell you what, Chris, this has been so much fun talking to you. The author's name is Chris McKittrick, and the book is Vera Miles, The Hitchcock Blonde Who Got Away. It's coming out. When's it coming out?
March 23rd.
March 23rd. Okay, and you can pre-order it now at Amazon or bn.com, or go into your local booksellers and brick and mortar store and order it there. Chris, I want to thank you so much for being on Lights Camera Author tonight.
Thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate that you plugged local bookstores because I always try to say that. I mean, I appreciate that Amazon can get my book to anyone, but if you can go in your local bookstore and order it, that's awesome. Support those stores.